News.
These cases began as an investigation into family child sex abuse. Law enforcement sought the DNA of Gary Cers Jr. related to the child sex abuse case. Once Cers Jr. was located, search warrants were executed to secure his DNA for genetic testing. Upon serving the search warrants for the child sex abuse case, the existence and condition of the 16 children at the Omar.
These cases began as an investigation into family child sex abuse. Law enforcement sought the DNA of Gary Cers Jr. related to the child sex abuse case. Once Cers Jr. was located, search warrants were executed to secure his DNA for genetic testing. Upon serving the search warrants for the child sex abuse case, the existence and condition of the 16 children at the Omar Street house became known.
Breaking news in the so-called House of Horrors case out of Ohio. The parents of 16 children indicted for alleged.
That is the official record. Read it again. 16 children, discovered not because someone kicked down a door, not because a neighbor screamed, but because investigators were looking for one man's DNA in a completely separate case. The paperwork already knew.
Nearly 2 months after state agents discovered 16 children in a home in rural Ohio, their parents have been indicted, and so have other people. Gary Cers Jr. and his wife Elizabeth were taken into custody on June 30th.
The so-called House of Horrors case out of rural Ohio. Gary Cers Jr. and his wife Elizabeth taken into custody on June 30th. Gary Sr. and Christina Cers, the grandparents, arrested too. All charged with 16 counts of child endangering.
After their children were discovered in a home on Omar Street, Gary Jr.'s parents, Gary Sr. and Christina Cers, were also arrested. All were charged with 16 counts of child endangering and entered not guilty pleas. The elder Cers have now been indicted on felony and misdemeanor.
But that was just the opening layer. The indictment would go further. Elizabeth and Gary Jr. now face charges involving sex with minors, not as a footnote, as the actual reason law enforcement was there in the first place.
Here's Vinton County Prosecutor William Archer with the.
Here is Vinton County Prosecutor William Archer with what he chose to say publicly.
Omar Street house became known. The child sex abuse cases involve intra-family relations and do not pose a risk to the general public, and I would also add, does not involve human trafficking. This case all started with diligent Dollar General clerks.
The child sex abuse cases involve intrafamily relations and do not pose a risk to the general public, and I would also add, does not involve human trafficking. Intrafamily relations. That phrase is doing a lot of work. It tells you the alleged victims were not strangers. It tells you this was contained. It does not tell you how contained.
Calling authorities with concerns over children they observed. We ask the public to be mindful of the circumstances around them, especially involving children. We continue to ask for the public's respect for the rights and privacy of the child victims in this case. I'd like to add.
This case all started with diligent Dollar General clerks calling authorities with concerns over children they observed. Dollar General clerks. Not a school, not a doctor, not a mandated reporter with a badge and a file. Minimum wage employees at a discount store saw something that everyone else apparently missed. The paperwork already knew.
A Vinton County grand jury today has issued indictments in 3 criminal cases involving sexual abuse and child endangerment. These charges stem from criminal investigations conducted by the Vinton County Sheriff's Office and the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigations, BCI. The cases are being prosecuted by the Vinton County Prosecutor's Office with the assistance from the Highland County Prosecutor's Office and the Ohio Attorney General's Special Prosecutions.
Vinton County Sheriff Ryan Kane then laid out the timeline. A grand jury indicted 3 separate criminal cases involving sexual abuse and child endangerment. The investigations were run by the Vinton County Sheriff's Office and the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigations. The prosecution includes the Ohio Attorney General's Special Prosecutions Unit.
In December of 2025, at the request of the Vinton County Sheriff's Office, BCI's Special Victims Unit opened an investigation into allegations of sexual abuse involving 2 children. Information obtained in this investigation prompted BCI in March of 26 to open a second investigation, this one involving allegations of unlawful.
And here is where the chronology gets uncomfortable. In December of 2025, BCI's Special Victims Unit opened an investigation into allegations of sexual abuse involving 2 children. That was the first case. Then, In March of 2026, information from that investigation prompted a second one, this time involving allegations of unlawful sexual conduct with a minor.
Sexual conduct with a minor. On June 30th, authorities executed a search warrant at a residence in Hampton, Ohio, and Benton County on Omar Street. There have been a lot of speculation and questions regarding the June 30th presence on Omar Street in Hampton.
That second investigation led authorities to execute a search warrant on June 30th at a residence on Omar Street in Hampton, Ohio. Not to find the 16 children, to find DNA evidence. The children were almost incidental to the warrant.
The grand jury has indicted Gary Cers Jr. and Elizabeth Cers on 4 felony charges each, 2 counts of sexual battery and 2 counts of unlawful sexual conduct with a minor. I've learned law enforcement
The grand jury indicted Gary Cers Jr. and Elizabeth Cers on 4 felony charges each, 2 counts of sexual battery, 2 counts of unlawful sexual conduct with a minor, and the victims, according to the public record, were identified during a separate sex abuse investigation that began in December of 2025.
Like the indictment or charges against the 2 Cers go back to 2022, the first quarter of 2022, against unnamed victims, but they were related to the investigation of the other 2 people indicted on sex offenses today. Curiously enough, the press release indicates that the victims were not a member of the immediate family of the Cers, but at the same time, the statement given by the county prosecutor would seem that perhaps they were. So that's something that you and...
Here is what the actual charging language says. The indictment alleges that between January and September 2022, the defendants engaged in sexual conduct with a minor more than 10 years younger than their own age. And then this line, the victim is not a member of their immediate family. Not immediate family, but the prosecutor called it intrafamily. So which is it?
Yeah, we're digging into that for sure and clarifying. And I want to read what the press release says. It says the indictment alleges that between January and September 2022, the defendants engaged in sexual conduct with a minor more than 10 years younger than their own age. The victim is not a member of their immediate family. So it said, that he said, this says not a member of the immediate family. However, the prosecutor said this was an intra-family thing.
That contradiction is not minor. The press release says the victim is outside the immediate family. The prosecutor says the crimes were intra-family. That gap is where this case actually lives. Someone is being precise. Someone is being vague. And the difference matters.
Investigation 1, which involves Josh Saunders and Brandon Henderson. This is investigation 1 that began in December of 2025. The information about Gary Cers Jr. and Elizabeth Cers was developed from that investigation. So that is what led the law enforcement officers initially to that.
The first investigation involved 2 other men, Josh Saunders and Brandon Henderson. That investigation began in December 2025, and from it, law enforcement developed information about Gary Cers Jr. and Elizabeth Cers. That is what led them to the house on Omar Street. Not a public indecency warrant, not a tip about the children, a separate sex abuse case.
This was going to be much more serious.
Yeah, and I think we both kind of concluded that at the time, based on the conduct of the investigators. You don't have the Ohio Attorney General down in Benton County for a warrant on a...
Former Franklin County Prosecutor Ron O'Brien put it plainly, you do not bring the Ohio Attorney General down to Benton County for a warrant on an exposing case. The presence of that unit told you the stakes before anyone said a word. The paperwork already knew.
Archer, the Benton County prosecutor, said that alert Dollar General employees contacted law enforcement about their concerns about some of the children that they saw with Gary Jr. and Elizabeth Cers. They were very concerned. And so it seems like potentially we may have had a couple of different things going on here. We have Dollar General employees, and then we also have this investigation 1 where information...
And then there is the Dollar General detail again. employees contacted law enforcement about concerns over children they observed with Gary Jr. and Elizabeth. That means two separate streams of information were converging on the same house. A sex abuse investigation that started with two other men and minimum wage workers who saw something wrong in a checkout line.
So the sheriff said that this investigation is ongoing. And we know from the Vinton County prosecutor telling the commissioners we're seeking permanent custody of the children that's going to happen, and they will more than likely be successful in obtaining permanent custody of the children, especially if there's a conviction on a sex crime. So I'm thinking to myself,
the sheriff says the investigation is ongoing. The prosecutor is seeking permanent custody of the 16 children. And the question that hangs over everything is this: if they found 16 children while serving a DNA warrant in a separate sex abuse case, what else is in those files that has not yet been unsealed?
Well, at least if they thought they had enough on inter-family sexual misconduct, I would have included it in the indictment today. And so either they don't have enough because it wasn't going on inside the family home, or the children are still in the process of being interviewed, going through social workers and psychological treatment and testing, and they may not want to proceed at this point. They can always, as you know, produce a superseding indictment.
O'Brien pointed to the possibility of a superseding indictment. New charges, new victims. The children are still being interviewed through social workers and psychological treatment. That process takes time, and it means the 4 felony counts against Gary Jr. and Elizabeth may not be the final number.
Ron, let's move on now to the elder Cers. Gary Cers Sr. is 73 years old. He's out on a signature bond wearing a GPS bracelet. When he was released on that signature bond because of his serious medical issues, the Vinton County prosecutor said, look, he's not a threat to the public. But he and his wife, Christina, the grandparents, have now been indicted. They're facing 2 counts of child endangering felonies in the 2nd degree, 10 counts of endangering children, felonies of the 3rd degree, and then 7 counts of endangering children. Those are misdemeanors. They are not charged with any sex crimes. So how do you see their cases ending up? Because, I mean, they're challenging their competency, or at least their lawyers are saying they may not be competent to stand trial. However, they have not been charged with any sex crimes.
Yes, it's interesting that the elder Cers were not indicted on any sex offenses, either within the family or outside the family. They are just facing the multiple endangering children charges that range from a misdemeanor up to the 2nd degree felony. So what we can conclude from that is apparently they don't have enough evidence now.
Then there are the grandparents. Gary Sr. is 73 years old, released on a signature bond with a GPS bracelet because of serious medical issues. He and Christina face 2 counts of 2nd degree felony child endangering, 10 counts of 3rd degree felony child endangering, and 7 misdemeanor counts. No sex crimes. Not because they are innocent, because the evidence has not yet reached that threshold, or because it never will.
These cases began as an investigation into family child sex abuse. Law enforcement sought the DNA of Gary Cers Jr. related to the child sex abuse case. Once Cers Jr. was located, search warrants were executed to secure his DNA for genetic testing. Upon serving the search warrants for the child sex abuse case, the existence and condition of the 16 children at the Omar Street house became known. The child sex abuse cases involve intra-family relations and do not pose a risk to the general public, and I would also add, does not involve human trafficking. This case all started with diligent Dollar General clerks calling authorities with concerns over children they observed. We ask the public to be mindful of the circumstances around them, especially involving children. We continue to ask for the public's respect for the rights and privacy of the child victims in this case. I'd like to add a thank you to the Vinton County Sheriff's Office and BCI for their investigative efforts, which have been amazing. This case is going to be prosecuted by myself, Kara Keating, Assistant Attorney General, and Annika Collins, Highland County Prosecuting Attorney. Thank you.
Gary Jr., Elizabeth, and Christina Cers remain.
The final public statement from the prosecutor repeated the same framing. Intrafamily relations. No risk to the general public, no human trafficking. A thank you to the Sheriff's Office and BCI, and then the names of the prosecutors who will take this case forward. Gary Jenner, Elizabeth, and Christina Cers remain in jail. They will be arraigned on these new charges, and the 16 children remain in state custody while the investigation continues. The paperwork already knew.